You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and today we are here with Peter Bergson. Susan Shilcock is his partner. Peter is the co-director of Open Connections in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
And Peter and I are going to be talking a little bit about Open Connections, which is a family resource center. First of all, Peter, give us a little bit of background of what kinds of things that you've done and how Open Connections came to be.
Well, as far as my own personal journey, I got committed to learning more about learning and being with young people in the summer after I graduated from college. I was enrolled in a training program for the Peace Corps in elementary education, specifically learning to teach new math to old math Filipino teachers. And went through a training program of about 10 weeks, and in the midst of that, two major events. One was realization that 73 out of the 75 fellow volunteers, all of whom were college graduates also, were basically clueless with regard to truly understanding elementary math. And the second major event was kind of an explanation for how that could be. A friend of mine at the time sent me a copy of John Holt's first book, How Children Fail, which had been published in 1964, and I literally had an epiphany. All of the old expressions, scales falling from my eyes, etc., hold true. And as I read this book and I read Holt's descriptions of the games and strategies that kids adopt in order to fake it and make it look like they know what they're doing when in fact they really don't know, and that even includes people who are often considered highly successful in school. I had the response, my goodness, that's me, and that's my fellow volunteers. And at that moment, I committed myself to finding out if there's a better way, if there's another way. There had to be a better way of educating young people than what I and my my generation had experienced. And that's how I personally got started down this road. I can give you more details of where the steps went after that if you'd like. But
well, let's start with, first of all, Open Connections is called a Family Resource Center.
Yes.
What is a Family Resource Center?
Well, it's the result of some transformative process. My wife, Susan Shilcock, whom you mentioned earlier, and I started Open Connections in 1975 with the intention of developing this better way, if I may be so audacious, of educating particularly young children. We were especially interested in 3 to 5-year-olds at that time. And it took us a couple of years to get financing and other arrangements together, and in the fall of 1978, we opened as a alternative preschool kindergarten program for 3 to 5-year-olds, with an emphasis on what we called the other basics. The primary one being flexible thinking, the ability to think creatively, which we saw as being natural in young children, but largely being kind of schooled out of them or socialized out of them. Over the years, as families became more interested, particularly parents more interested in learning more about what we were doing, as well as having their children be involved, we started more workshops for adults, and we started expanding the ages of the young people that we worked with to 6 and 7. And coincidentally, at that time, we learned about the option in Pennsylvania of homeschooling, which was kind of hard to come by at that point, but it was still a legal option.
In 1975, it was very difficult to homeschool your children.
Right, and actually by the time we heard about it, it was, I think, 1980 or 79. John Holt had started publishing his national magazine, Growing Without Schooling, in late 1977, and he was out for about a year and a half or so with that before we got wind of it. And at that point, we became even more committed to the concept of family-centered, family-directed education, not only for young people, but for any member of the family. But clearly with the emphasis on the young people. And so we changed our name even and modified our mission from Open Connections School to Open Connections Family Resource Center. And that's what we do now. We run programs for young people primarily, but we also do have shorter-term workshops and things for adults, with the express purpose of supporting the kind of natural learning process that we saw in evidence in 3 to 5-year-olds, and wanted to perpetuate and wanted to help parents perpetuate, because we think ultimately they have more influence over their young people than, certainly more positive influence than any institutional experience is likely to have, such as schooling. And so it fit very nicely with the homeschooling option. So
now, Peter, Family Resource Center how is that? What grades are you right now? I mean, what ages are you right now in terms of offering on-site to students?
Right now, 4 through 15.
4 through
years
15.
Old.
You have
however,
4 through
we're in the middle of a transitional phase. We have just purchased a significantly larger property, and it will increase our options considerably, to the point where we see having more programs for the teenage years, and that may include 16, 17-year-olds. And also, we anticipate resuming something that we have done in the past but had to give it up for lack of space, which is programs for parents and toddlers together. So we'll be stretching at either end of that 4 to 15-year spectrum within the next year and a half as we move and as we do a little bit of construction on our new site.
Now, listen, I need to, in the mind of the people who are listening, how do you have 4-year-old? I mean, do you keep everyone in separate rooms, or how do you keep 4-year-olds and teenagers together on the same campus?
Well, it's just like real life in one way. One might ask, well, how do they stay together in a family? And as far as programs are concerned, the programs are designed, depending on the nature of the program, they are designed to have a spread of young people in them, but not that full spread. So, for example, we have what we call an open program, which means it's open to the young people's choice of what activities they choose to do. And that's for 4 to 10-year-olds. And then we have another type of program, which we call group tutorials, and they are for young people grouped in 2 to 3 year spreads. For example, 7 to 9-year-olds. There's one for 10 to 12-year-olds currently, and one for 13 to 15-year-olds. So they would be, during their program time, they will be, in their own respective areas. But on any given day on a new campus, which we're calling the Open Connections Village, in one building or in one part of a building, there'll be, let's say, a group tutorial for 13 to 15-year-olds, and a couple of rooms away, there'll be the Heart of an Open program for 4 to 10-year-olds.
How many students do you have at Open Connections?
Currently, there are 73 or 74 enrolled. I should hasten to add that each program meets 1 day a week, and some young people come to one program, so they're here only on, let's say, Wednesdays during some fairly conventional school-type hours of 9:15 to 2:15 or 3. Other young people may be enrolled in 2 or 3 programs and, say, be here Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. In our new site, we expect to have about a 50 to 75% increase in enrollment. So on any given day, between 100, 125 young people on site. We know it's going to take us a little while to grow to that size, but within a year or so, we should be there. And because of the additional types of programs, 2 or 3 of those young people may be working with a mentor, let's say in a dark room or at a pottery wheel, or out tilling the soil for some organic gardening. So the young people will be spread out, not all bunched in individual rooms, and they're certainly not sitting at desks and doing school type of or being subjected to long periods of school type instruction.
Now, Peter, you have published a book called Open Connection, The Other Basics.
Yes.
Before we get into that, I'd like to remind our audience you're listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We're here today with Peter Bergson from Open Connections, the Family Resource Center, and that's in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. You can telephone Peter at 610-527-1504. That's 610-527-1504. Or you can email him at PAB, as in boy, OCI at AOL.com. Or you can reach us here toll free at 877-PRO-KIDS. Now, Peter, you, as I just said, published a book called Open Connection, The Other Basics. Can you describe for us what the other basics are?
Yes. And I must say, in some ways, our thinking has shifted a bit since we published that 20 years ago. It actually came out in 1980. In some areas, in other areas, I have 20 years more experience that reinforce even further my belief in some of much of what we wrote. The 3 other basics that we identified, obviously other referring to other than reading, writing, and arithmetic, we called flexible thinking, decision-making, and self-esteem. Flexible thinking was and still is the most near and dear to our hearts, primarily because it's the one least attended to and in many ways most at risk in our culture. By flexible thinking, we mean the ability to take a problem or an opportunity and go outside of conventional thinking to create new ways of looking at a problem or an opportunity and new ways of addressing it, new concepts, new ideas, and bringing those new ways down to a level of reality that makes them practical and functional. We saw in young people, 3 to 5-year-olds in particular, a great ability to be highly speculative, highly wishful, highly creative and inventive in their thinking. But young people don't know enough to convert their fantasies or their visions, their dreams, into a functional, practical reality most of the time. They just don't have the skills. They don't have the information. Unfortunately, in our culture, in the traditional process of acquiring all that information, we learn to, or in many cases are driven to, give up or trade off our ability to think creatively. We get so obsessed with right answers that we lose track of, I don't think we lose completely, but we sort of allow to atrophy the muscles that go outside that box.
I like that analogy.
And the muscle atrophy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way it is.
Because it's, and that's the good news, it's always retrievable. We can always build them back up again. And so our goal, to paraphrase Stephen Caney, the inventor and children's book author, is to generate the ability to create options and to always find options when you think that you're stuck, and that when you think that the only option is one that's unacceptable, and to know that there are always options, and then have the ability to be able to create ones that are, in many cases, even far more enjoyable or successful than what you thought you were going to have to settle for. So that's the flexible thinking portion of the other basics. The second is decision making. And that includes not only making choices when there are two known variables or three variables, but also creating, and this ties in with flexible thinking, creating the ability to make decisions when often the basic information or what you think are the options in front of you aren't really to your liking. How do you go about generating more constructive, more attractive options? And then how do you go about deciding how you're going to proceed? So often young people are in a world where other people make almost all of the meaningful decisions in their lives, and then at age 18 or 22 or something, the system spits them out and says, okay, now it's time for you to decide the really big stuff, like what do you want to do with your life? And they haven't, again, to use the muscle analogy, they haven't built up the muscle strength from the experience of making lots of meaningful decisions and getting feedback and then making whatever adjustments are appropriate in the light of that feedback. Now, everybody makes some decisions, but often young people are not allowed to make the ones that have most impact and feel most significant to them. They feel like somebody else is always in charge. And we think it's important to start the process of building that decision-making skill set much earlier than in life than is traditionally been the case. The third area is the one where probably our thinking has changed more than the other two.
You don't think self-esteem is important?
I think self-esteem is very important. I think we were influenced by the work of people like Jack Canfield and others. He's co-author of a book called 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Esteem in the Classroom.
And, of course, Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Right. What I find is there's a very delicate balance between personal responsibility and external experience, if you will. And I think that you can't really give other people positive self-esteem. And in reality, you can't really destroy it in other people if they have some other source of support for the positive development of their self-esteem. There are plenty of people who have had really terrible experiences in their lives that they've not only survived but have developed strength to in the process of overcoming them. as opposed to there are other people who look to have had a very loving, supportive, kind of easy time of it, who have a very poor ability to overcome resistance and criticism and that sort of thing. And so I found myself asking the question, what is it that ultimately drives other people to have the kind of sense of self, the strength of self? I'm not even sure esteem is the right word, but something that causes them to believe at their core that it's okay for them to be them. It's okay to own their feelings, even if they aren't acceptable to other people. To have their own will and their own tastes and their own desires, and not be driven by either peer pressure or adult parental pressure. I'm reminded of that the scene in the movie David and Lisa, the two psychotic adolescents, where David goes home for a visit and his mother says, have some mashed potatoes, and he says, no, thank you. And she says, David, you've always liked mashed potatoes. Eat your mashed potatoes. And, of course, you can see the new David, as a result of his therapy and stuff, coming to terms with and realizing that it basically his training from his mother has been to disconnect him from his own feelings and his own thoughts, which is why he retreated into psychosis. And in a much less dramatic fashion, I think that's what happens to so many people in our culture. And for people who don't have that kind of incentive to disconnect, I think it's natural to have esteem. It doesn't need to be artificially generated. It doesn't need to be artificially constructed by outside people. We don't need to, for example, praise people to the ceiling in order to motivate them to do things that they would otherwise want to do.
What was your additional other basic other than self-esteem? Did you say you had others?
Well, the modification is really more to how to handle the self-esteem thing. And it mostly comes from not criticizing or the way in which corrections were introduced, not attacking the self-esteem of others, but a much less confidence, if you will, or sense of value in the what I was referring to as the kind of the artificial inflation of ego, or as I said, again, I'm influenced by John Holt on this one. He always says things much more succinctly than I do. But he says children don't need praise; they just need acknowledgement.
I guess that's true for not only children, but for most people.
Exactly. So a child does a painting. You don't need to just gush all over the child and say, oh, what a wonderful set of colors you've chosen, and I really like this, and oh, you must have worked so hard on it, and all that kind of stuff that people say, well, I do that to boost his self-esteem. I don't think that boosts self-esteem. As a matter of fact, I think in many ways it undermines it, because I think most children would, faced with that, would think, what is wrong with me that she thinks she needs to talk to me like that?
So what you're saying then is to merely acknowledge children by, for example, most people, and we're just not talking about children here, but we're also talking about adults as well. Most adults would concede that they would really like people to banter with them and not necessarily agree with them on issues and points and opinions, etc. And that in itself acknowledges someone's opinion or someone's belief system. And the same holds true for the products. One need not agree with the world, but one may, or as you said, give them this positive feedback, but rather the acknowledgement of whatever is going on is the key and the critical point here. So
Exactly.
We try to keep positive here, Peter. We
Yes.
try to give the positive aspects of whatever it is that we're talking about, because I think most of the time what we hear on the radio and most of the media, the television, the newspapers, is all negative. And what we try to do for our listeners is to convey all the positive things that we can be doing for our children and the rest of civilization, if you will.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Well, that fits, very nicely with what I was wanting to imply, which is if you express your interest in what your child has to say, or your young person, as well as other adults, if you have the integrity to respect to respect them enough to hear what they have to say and know that you don't have to agree with it, but give them permission to express their thoughts and honor their right to have their own opinions and their own tastes, that does it. That does the trick. And to avoid the continuous criticism or correction.
So the three things that are the other basics are flexible thinking, decision-making, and self-esteem. And if you'd like to purchase Open Connections, the other basics, which is the book that Peter Bergson and his partner Susan Shillcock have written, you may call Peter at 610-527-1504. That's 610-527-1504. And Open Connections School is in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. You can email them at paboci@aol.com. That's paboci@aol.com. If you'd like to call us here at Children Come First at any time, this is Dr. Darya Brzezinski, and we are toll-free 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877 PROKIDS, or you can email us at PROKIDS@rlc.net. That's PROKIDS@rlc.net. We're going to take a little break for a short time, and we'll be back with our second half hour of Children Come First. And we are joined again by Peter Bergson, the director of Open Connections, the Family Resource Center in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. That's Open Connections, the Family Resource Center, and this is Peter Bergson. And we were talking about Open Connections as a family resource center for homeschoolers, which is resource center and it's also an on-campus school for students, about approximately 74 students, ranging in ages from 4 all the way up to teenagers. And please join us for our second half hour, and we'll be talking a little bit more with Peter about other things regarding the Open Connections School. Join us again. Your internal and your external environments are so inviting for children. When you drive up, do you still have the fire truck outside?
No.
Oh, you don't?
No.
There were so many activities outside. There was a pulley with the water, and there were just all kinds of, I can't remember all the things at this point, but there were so many intriguing things for students to do before they even got into the classroom. And then when you got into the classroom, there were many, many activities that were, so students are allowed to roam and do these different, kind of like a Montessori approach, where there are many activities around for students to do hands-on. Is that your philosophy?
Yes, particularly in the open programs. And that fits in with the decision-making basic. They choose what they work on and what they get involved in. They choose with whom they do it. They can work on things on their own. And when I use the word work, I mean it in the full sense of the word. I don't think work and play are distinguishable for young children. So they can engage in activities on their own, or with one other young person, or another adult, or in a small cluster of young people. And all those permutations and combinations happen throughout the course of a 5-hour open program. And that's the kind of decision-making that we want to encourage more of, more opportunities for young folks.
One of the questions I had in my mind when you talked about expanding the school so much was, where are you going to get teachers to teach in these schools when you have such a very different philosophy than traditional teachers are taught to impart to students?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, and again, I could go on for more than the rest of the show on this one, but let me just
go ahead.
Quickly say, our view of the role of the adults primarily is not as instructors, but as facilitators. We believe that the natural learning process that comes from a child being motivated to understand how something works or what will happen if, to conduct his or her own experiments, to be physically engaged with materials, etc., that all of that energy is more than enough to help them construct knowledge and develop an understanding of the world. What they don't necessarily need is for someone to set the agenda for them and to tell them, in essence, what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, etc. So the adults in our environment, for the most part, are not conventional teachers because they're not fulfilling the conventional instructional, directional role of teachers. They are there to facilitate the other approach to what we call natural learning. Now, some of these are former classroom teachers, as in fact my wife and I are, either from an open program or sometimes, not often, but sometimes from a more traditional type of program. But probably half of the adults that are available to the young people are people from other aspects of adult life, either as parents or as artists in residence, is a term we use very broadly. And an example there might be a parent who comes in to offer the opportunity to make homemade linguine. Well, is this person a teacher? Are they teaching? Or are they sharing their love of cooking and their knowledge of some process, providing some materials, and saying, if this is something you'd like to do, come on and give it a try, and if you have questions or if I can offer any input that would be helpful, I'll be happy to do that.
So you use a lot of itinerant
facilitative role that we see.
So you use teachers as itinerant staff.
Right. There is a stable, consistent adult population. People who have responsibility for the oversight of the program, etc. And there are some of the same basic mechanics of being in charge that are different from, being directly with young people. So, say in an open program with 24 young people, there'll be, let's say, 5 adults. 2 of them will be there every week, or 3 of them would be there every week as facilitators, and consistently so. But the other 1 or 2 might change from week to week, or be there, for a couple of weeks, and they would be, in many instances, parents, or they may be college students that want to have an exposure to a different way of helping young children learn. They may be professionals in fields such as pottery, or somebody may maybe a beekeeper. They may be an environmentalist and would come and be available down at the creek to open up some options beyond, tossing rocks in the creeks and building dams, which has its own value. But if a child turns a rock over and sees these little squiggly things and says, "What are these?" It's helpful if somebody there can say, "Well, these are mayfly nymph," and they say, "Well, what's that?" And then they have that information. So at that moment, I guess they're doing some instructing, but they're not down there saying, "Okay, class, let's go down. I'm going to give you a lesson in pond life or creek life."
You let the natural learning process evolve then.
Yes. I mean, we do some initiating. We do some offering. But the freedom to choose what to do includes the freedom to choose not to do. And so if someone comes in and has an offering and most everybody else has other things that they'd rather be doing, that's fine. We don't gather everybody together and say, "You have to come do this."
One of the most critical parts about our learning process in the schools that exist today, in our traditional schools, is the fact that we really don't give children the opportunity. Well, there's two things. One is that we don't give them the opportunity for the passion of something that they would like to do, and that is what instills passion, is the fundamental desire to want to learn something. And secondly is we don't give them the opportunity to recapitulate and to mull over the things that they've already learned by giving them the time and the option and the space to just sit and digest or go over in their minds over and over again. Most of the time children have to do that when they're totally exhausted and laying in bed at night, which isn't much time. Mm-hmm. We always think that we have to keep children busy in order for them to be able to learn. And I guess what's happening at Open Connections and many other schools around the country who give children options is the fact that it gives them the opportunity to make the choice not to do something, to be able to just sit down and digest, relax. Maybe they had a bad night the night before and couldn't sleep. And this is the real world, not the 9-to-5 kind of box that we've put ourselves in not just in our learning environment, but in our school environment. What do you feel are, in a positive way, are the best paths to first of all, we'll tell people that this is Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and we're here today with Peter Bergson from Open Connections, the Family Resource Center in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. The telephone number is 610-527-1504. That's 610-527-1504. Or you can reach us here at Children Come First with our toll-free number at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. In a positive way, Peter, what do you see as the best path for real improvement in our educational system? What kinds of positive things can we do to improve it?
Well, I think the first thing is a shift in the sense of responsibility and ownership for the education of young people back from the state with a capital S to parents, and even more specifically to young people themselves. I think that we've created in the last 150 years a dependence on paid professional, well, I guess that's redundant, but that's what I mean by professional, is that they're paid as opposed to amateurs. Outsiders and so-called experts, and in so doing have depleted a sense of confidence and understanding on the part of parents themselves about the whole education process. So we've taken something that is perfectly natural to the species and which we're all hardwired to do, which is to learn and to grow and to understand. And we've basically turned this over to institutions and to people outside of us, and to the point where they are now telling us what's right, what's wrong, on a moment-by-moment, day-by-day, year-by-year basis. And I think that is a mistake, obviously. I think that making those kinds of mass decisions about individuals runs the exceptionally high risk that most people are not going to be well served by that. You might as well go out and throw a net over 50 people and say, okay, you 50 are going to be lawyers. I go out and throw another net over 50 other people and say, okay, you 50 are going to be ballet dancers, regardless of interest, body type, abilities, whatever. And so that's my first thought, is just a belief, a shift in the belief on the part of the consumers that we are ultimately responsible, not our paid employees. And even though lip service to that position is paid all the time, the truth is that most parents, in my experience, are very intimidated by what the schools tell them is important, and reinforced by the media. And that mindset that they know best, I think, has really hurt us very, very badly. Then, once that shift has started to occur, then we can work in partnership with the people who are professionally vested in the education of young people, to take a true scientific look at what we've got and where we want to be going, and do a comparison and a contrasting between what we're looking for and the results we're getting, and then do some creative problem solving about what do we need to change in order to get from where we seem to be headed to where we want to be headed. And I think there are going to be multiple answers to that, to how we get there, because there are going to be different answers in a diverse culture, even to where we want to be headed.
Well, I think that most people would agree that we do not have a definition of education. No one agrees anywhere, from the legislative level to the school boards to the superintendents to the principals to the teachers to the parents to the community and the business.
Right.
No one can agree on what education is, what is the purpose, what is our definition. It varies depending on whatever special interest group is doing the discussing. So
I think you're exactly right on that. And one of the things that drives the variation is the similar variation in our personal beliefs about human nature, and our own personal preferences and choices. But you're absolutely right. There's no shared vision of what the end is. And I think that's the route to get there is equally confusing.
Well, what happens is, if you don't have, anyone in business knows, if you don't have an ultimate goal, and if you don't have a mission statement, you're all over the board, which is what our problem is today. So we all need a consensus of what it is that we're looking at. What do we want our children to be when they are graduates, when they leave these institutions? Where do we want them to go? Do we want them to be successful in business? Do we want them to be lifelong learners? Do we want them to be happy in their lives? Where everyone has a different perspective on where we need to go, so we flounder. Mm-hmm. And we flounder because no one can take us on the road to saying this is where we should go. We're not being given a direction here, and everyone has a different pursuit in the way. And that gives us the multitude of diverse models that we have around the country, from the homeschooling model, family resource centers, Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, charter schools, voucher schools, schools within schools. We've got model after model after model, and yet for the last quarter of a century, there have been many schools that have been in operation, much like yours, who have been teaching children to be critical thinkers and all the kinds of things that seem to be on the agenda, especially of the government, and the kinds of things that we want people to learn, and business as well, and haven't been taking notice. We are still bogged down in the 150-year-old mentality of the infrastructure of what education should look like.
Right. And I think, if you read people like John Taylor Gatto and others, you can see the roots of that thinking in that schooling, as opposed to education, was basically contrived to create a workforce for the Industrial Revolution. We wanted people to sit down, shut up, park their brains at the door, take direction from bosses, and do what needed to be done to make industrial America work. We needed to be able to have them understand the language, so if they were foreign immigrants from another country, didn't speak the language, so we needed to acculturate them. But we really weren't about, in the construction of the public education mode, about creating people who could think for themselves and make their own choices and decisions. And so what we're left with now, that a lot of people are calling for that as an outcome, is we've got a system that was designed to produce something different. We've got a system that was designed to produce gas guzzlers, and we've decided we want environmentally sound cars. And the same assembly line cannot crank out both types of products. So we need to go back to the assembly line and say we need to, at the very least, build some other assembly lines that will produce other products, or maybe even dismantle this one if we decide we don't want what this one produces.
Frankly, Peter, herein lies the problem. We think of students as products and machines,
right.
And I think that is why we have such incredible violence in America, because we do see students as assembly line products.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I would like us to get away from is that mentality of the assembly line, and
right.
the fact that we cannot, the current curriculum in education is not, and nor are the legislative laws, cannot be all things to all people in the way that it's designed. And we need to personalize and get more in respect to where each child, the direction of each child needs to go. So the mentality of looking at education as an assembly line and students as products, and I mean, we refer to it all the time, and I hear legislators refer to them all the time as if they were a product. We have to have outcomes and assessments, and these are all terms that we use for products, and a child is not a product. They are an individual with a heart and a soul, much more than any machine or product could possibly convey. And I think we need to rethink and use different terms
mm-hmm.
for what we are talking about is in regard to children.
Yes. Well, to the extent that we engage in a process with a particular intention, I think there is validity to the concept of a planned outcome. But the interaction between the individual spirit and that process is something that, as you say, has its own validity, its own kind of right to life, its own raison d'etre. And I think that's what you're saying is, let's not leave individual will and individual soul and spirit out of the equation so that we think that we can mold and shape young people or anybody into products of our own design. So I'm in complete agreement with you about that. When I use the analogy, the industrial analogy, what I'm referring to is only that part of the equation that is the process of the adult involvement. So if your process is to let kids go out and play all day, that's still a process. If your process is to make them sit at a desk all day, that's a different process. But again, it's whatever you're doing with the intention of a desired outcome. And my goal of a desired outcome is people who are recognize their interdependence with the rest of the species, people who value multiple intelligences, their own and other people's, people who have a basic respect for life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness for themselves and for others, the basic social contract of this country. And so there are expectations that I have for other people. But first and foremost, I'd say they have the right to their own choices, as long as they aren't choosing to interfere with my choices. And that's the way we operate Open Connections. The young people who come in are free to choose what to do, as long as they're not interfering with the rights and privileges of other people. So if you want to take the electric typewriter down to the creek and see if it floats, you may not do that, because that's going to take away the right of other people to use the electric typewriter for its intended purpose. On the other hand, if you want to see if such a piece of equipment floats, we'll work to get an old non-working typewriter that you can take apart, see if it floats, et cetera, et cetera. So the obligation is to respect the goals and wishes of other people, but only in the context of a collaboration. It doesn't mean you have to give up everything you want because somebody else wants something different. It means you have to be committed to working out with other people so that life becomes a win-win for you. And that is an expectation. That is part of the contract of being at Open Connections. And if that isn't your philosophy, and if it isn't your goal, if your basic goal is, I want somebody to do my bidding exactly, then this probably isn't the place for you. So we do have an anticipated outcome in that sense. But what your choices are in terms of content area, if you choose to pursue interests in one area versus another, nobody has the right to criticize or restrict that.
You have been listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We have been here today with Peter Bergson, and I thank you, Peter, from Open Connections Family Resource Center in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to reach Peter and ask him any questions about Open Connections, you may call him at 610-527-1504. That's 610-527-1504. You can email him at paboci@aol.com. That's paboci@aol.com. If you'd like any information about our program or anything we've done on this program, you can call us toll-free at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. And you can email us as well at prokids, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. That's PROKIDS at rlc.net. We'd like to thank you for joining us this week, talking about a little bit about everything in terms of the Family Resource Center and its self-directed learning and homeschooling, and as a resource center for parents and individual independent learning for children. If you'd like to call us at any time, please call us again at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS. Or email us at prokids@rlc.net. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Please join us and have a wonderful week.